This time on Unboxed, it's the law, and our guest is Ludmila Yamalova. Ludmila's the founder. She's the managing partner of Yamalova and Plethka. They're based in Jumeirah Lakes Towers. It's a law firm. They're also known as LY Law. She's been active for over 20 years in legal terms, and it all started, I believe, in Silicon Valley in California. She's well known in legal circles here in the UAE. She's a friend of mine, and she's also known to many as the TikTok lawyer. Ludmila, nice to see you.
It's great to be here, Tim. Thanks very much for inviting.
Well, look, thanks for coming into Unbox. Before we dig into what you do here in the UAE legally, I've got lots of questions to ask you because it is so dynamic, and we'll talk about that. Just give us the history of Ludmila Yamalova in 3 acts, or less.
Wow, how far back do you go? Because we're at the age now where that in itself could be a podcast to itself.
I'll just point when I need to come in.
So I moved to the UAE in 2008 during the, as I guess it was known, the real estate boom. And I came here from San Francisco, as you rightfully said. I was based in San Francisco before that. That's where I was practicing law. I came here, what I thought was going to be for 1 year. And that was, I think, now 17 years ago.
Yeah, happens to us all, doesn't it?
Indeed, it does. This place does that to you, sort of like a vortex, just sucks you in, and you're a part of it, and it's very hard to leave. So I came here. I thought I'll travel and then head back to San Francisco, and then I think one thing led to another. That was, as I mentioned, that was a real estate boom at the time. This was 2008. This was before the financial crisis. There's a lot of Russian-speaking investors and business owners, real estate investors in the UAE. Now I was born and raised in Ukraine, but I speak Russian as well. And I have a very Slavic name. So here, the combination of being an American qualified lawyer and having Russian ended up being a very lucrative and at the same time a rare set of skills for all these investors who've come to the UAE at the time and wanted to invest, wanted to open up businesses. And anytime people hear you were a lawyer, people have questions. So I just sort of felt like there was an opportunity here for someone who knows law, who is interested in law. There's certainly a lot of need for people who could provide legal services, and I spoke the language. I had the credentials, so it seemed like people came to me. I didn't come here to set up a business. I didn't come here to actually practice law. I just came to the UAE, what I thought was going to be an adventure for about 1 year, and just one thing led to another. People hear you're a lawyer. People hear you're from the US. They hear you speak Russian, and all of a sudden you've got clients. So it was kind of through that I got wrapped into this. Well, maybe this could be an opportunity for me to see if I can set up my own practice. Now, I wanted to more or less be on my own or be part of a smaller practice because the place where I worked previously, or I had still been working when I was here, so I was just working for them remotely. By the way, this was 2008, and back then I was already working remotely, which was quite interesting. So I was an in-house counsel for a senior in-house counsel, so an associate general counsel for a publicly traded company in the Bay Area called Finisar. And that particular opportunity and my role at Finisar were quite amazing for somebody at my level at the time. So I loved my job. I loved the responsibilities and the opportunities that I had, and just the kind of the management style, if you will. So I could not imagine working for anybody else. I could not imagine going and working for a big law firm. Yeah. So it was kind of a combination of, okay, well, looks like there's a need a niche that I can potentially fill. On the one hand, on the other hand, I don't really want to work for any big corporate. And then kind of through, this was at that time in particular, was very much expat, kind of culture driven. You know one person and you get connected to everybody else. And so it's kind of through a number of introductions, I was introduced to a group of other lawyers, expat lawyers, who were in the process of setting up a small practice. So long story short, I sort of joined them first, and that was and I was an interesting contribution or a model to them because of all these assets that I had that they did not have. An American lawyer, which at the time there were not that many Americans here, period, certainly not American lawyers. And because there's so much Russian-speaking kind of clientele, so it was kind of the right fit. And that's basically, that was kind of my, I started practicing with them. That did not last that long, and kind of spun off on my own. And because I was lucky, to be honest with you, I was just in the right place at the right time. So because of all these attributes, I had my own clientele. So it was fairly easy for me to spin off and have my own practice that could sustain me commercially.
I mean, the thing is, I mean, we've known each other for quite a few years, and I won't say how many years, but you set up and you're kind of, I think the best way to describe your firm, you're kind of a boutique law firm, aren't you, really? It's a general practice, I know that. Almost all female practice as well, which I guess is still kind of unusual in some ways. But when you set up, you set out to do things your way, and you're still doing them your way.
Oh, indeed. And in that way, I consider myself very fortunate and blessed to have had the opportunity to set up, period, and have had the fortune of being able to not just survive, but, to do well enough to still exist. I don't want to say to succeed and because success obviously has many meanings. So you're absolutely right. It was a very unique opportunity, and maybe it's still in a way a unique proposition what we offer, and we are a small firm, as you said, and that's for a number of legal and administrative reasons, which perhaps are of less interest for today's discussion. But we are also a general practice firm, and we're a general practice firm because, and this is perhaps one of the more interesting, if not the driving factors as to how I ended up ultimately setting up a law practice at the time, in a very new country to me, in a very new legal system of which, frankly, I did not know very much. And it's because the UAE is, as we all know, is a fairly new country, and that means its legislative history is less in depth, perhaps, as certainly the English system, but also the U.S. system. So it was more feasible to kind of know many things about many things. So you didn't have to be a specialist in one area or another, because so the depth of legal jurisprudence of UAE legal system was not as the same level as it is in a country that is many centuries old. So therefore it was possible to learn a little bit about contract, a little bit of real estate, a little bit of employment, a little bit about immigration, a little bit of banking. So it was just, and that's how it's by virtue of that you became a general practice. And in a way, I don't like this so much perhaps, but I'll say it anyways, like jack of all trades, and I'd like to say masters of many, because it's possible. It was possible in the UAE at that point in time.
Yeah, and that's important to point out, I think. But your depth of knowledge has grown hugely, and I know that from working with you on podcasts over the years. But so you arrive here in the UAE, and it's time to launch your own firm. You make the decision to do it. You're in the initial stages, or actually in the middle of the initial property boom, which was such a huge thing, 2008, 2009, here in the UAE. Think back to those times and think ahead to now, and just think through some of the changes. And I want to pitch 3 questions at you, not just in the country, the changes in the country, but specifically the changes in the legal system here in the UAE. It's been enormous, and we'll go into some detail in a second, but it's become more efficient, it's become more transparent, it's more focused, it's on specific rights, I guess, as well, and protections. But can you put into words the change from then to now? Is that even possible?
Transformative in every way, unprecedented, perhaps, and I'd say so. I practice law, as you rightfully pointed out, for all too many decades. And by virtue of the type of work I've done, so I have been exposed to many other legislative systems around the world.
Yeah.
And what the UAE has done and continues to do is truly not just unprecedented, it's mind-boggling. It's awesome, truly awesome in every way, in the sense, of the emotional sense, but also at just the volume and the scope and the breadth of its legal transformation. And it just continues to exceed every expectation, and continues to always catch you by surprise when you just think you've got your fingers on the pulse and you know where things are going. It throws another curveball, but always in the positive way, always in a progressive way, and always forward. And I don't say it here just because we're sitting, truly is that way. And I have seen it, and I've been the recipient and the beneficiary of that. And if you just even pause that for a second, if you look at my story, here I am. I arrived to the Middle East in 2008. And by the way, I remember I was leaving the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, in 2008, and I was leaving the company the Finisar company that I was working. And people were asking me, "Were you moving to the Middle East? Are women allowed to drive there?" This is not an exaggeration. Yeah. And do they have TV? So, and that was basically the era during which I moved here. I was a single white European woman who doesn't speak any Arabic, did not speak any Arabic, did not have any relatives, no friends, no connections. And I managed to set up a practice that, fast forward 17 years later, is still in place, which in of itself tells you about the uniqueness of this, not just the legal system, but also the business environment in the UAE that allows for somebody like a nobody. I truly was a nobody that came here and was able to do things. And by the way, nobody threw money at me. Nobody helped me in any way in terms of, okay, here's an office, or here's some funding. I just did everything on my own with my own two little feet and on my own shoulders.
Well, I wasn't really going to talk about that today, but we talked about this together in the past, but I know that you did this with your own funds and grew organically, which is admirable in and of itself. But it's just, it always seems when we talk, Ludmila, and we talk regularly, it's just this, what's happened now? Oh, this has happened. We've got to talk about this. We need to do this. And that's never been anything other than the way we talk about the system. It's changed so much. Just since COVID, for example, the fact that the UAE just went online, the legal system just went online, and it is still online, and it works fantastically well.
It's tremendous. So, if you want to talk about the transformation and of the UAE's legal system and the business system, that perhaps was the kind of the trigger point, maybe, and that was the defining moment of, in some ways, perhaps most, I dare to say, revolutionary changes in the legal system. And so it was, the UAE had, even prior to that, been very welcoming of expats, as we all know, and had been very open for business. But there were a few legal nuances which made things somewhat sort of dated in a way. For example, the criminal laws that at the time criminalized bounce checks. So if you bounce a check, you go to jail. Or out of wedlock pregnancies. If you get pregnant out of wedlock, you go to jail along with with your baby in some ways. And the laws had always been known. So why people, obviously, it didn't keep it a secret to others. Any kind of basically behavior then in public might have seemed inappropriate could land you to in jail. For example, using profanity in public, which a lot of people obviously do but don't think about it, could lead you in jail. So there was a few little nuances, but the UAE criminal system and culturally was sort of it was understandable, and the UAE had always been very open about it. But those are kind of things that, from a legal standpoint, because I'm talking about this from a legal standpoint, because those are the clients that come to us, for example, because there is a case that was open to them against them because their check bounced for a property on which they took a mortgage and they were not able to service, for example, or for setting up companies which required to have local sponsorship. So foreign businesses wanted to move into the UAE, wanted to set up here, but they felt restricted and limited, and had to set up businesses with local partners, which meant that there's somebody else, a local entity or a person that holds 51% of your business. So there's a lot of these kind of nuances, which by that time, people are very adaptive breed, and people figured out ways around it. And you and I talked about them many times. And so. But it was during COVID that also another nuance, perhaps in legal terms, in terms of having access to justice, having access to court systems, having access to the courts in general was somewhat, it was all dependent on local advocates, and local advocates are basically Emirati-owned firms, Emirati lawyers-owned firms, and so if anybody, whenever anybody had a legal matter, they had to hire an Emirati law firm. Now, the UAE is not a huge country. The UAE population, in terms of the Emirati nationals, is not that huge, but within that, Emirati lawyers there are just not that many. Yeah. And so people perhaps didn't have the same kind of access to judicial system before, because they were all reliant. They had all go through these few local firms. So that's just another nuance of how business was run, and everything was done, as you remember, just even the powers of attorney. Like, you had to do a power of attorney for anything that you did in the legal field. You needed to have power of attorney. If you wanted to represent a client, you need to have a power of attorney. You wanted to help sell a property or buy a property, you need a power of attorney. The power of attorney it's a term of art in the UAE. We all know it. We all do it. But to do it, you needed to go physically to the notary, and at the time the lines, because everybody was doing powers of attorneys, and so because that was a way of life, so it would. You remember those trips? Some of those trips would take hours to be in the notary office before you walk out with a POA. Now, COVID comes, right? And so from a legal standpoint, I mean, the issues we deal with a lot are many, but a lot of real estate issues, bounce checks, including criminal cases for pregnancy out of wedlock, for defamation, and so partnership disputes, and so on and so forth. So now COVID comes, and all of a sudden, the UAE businesses are in a way cut off from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is cut off from us. And because so many people and so many businesses here obviously are owned by foreigners, these foreigners, many of them ended up being outside of the UAE, and now they cannot manage their businesses because they had not given, for example, powers of attorneys to the people on the ground to represent them, and they needed to do business, but they were not able to fly physically, and they could not do the POA because the only way to do the POA was to come physically into the notary's office, as you recall. And why I start with this, because that was kind of the transformative, the trigger point that just seemed like just opened the floodgate to all the other changes. So it's something as small as that, just the powers of attorney. But it was during COVID, when the rest of the world was on lockdown. We were on lockdown. Somehow the UAE figured out a way to all of a sudden switch this very otherwise kind of grounded and well-rooted, deeply rooted notary system in the physical world. It was rooted in the physical world online. Yeah. So they made these POAs online, and it took a while before we learned about it. I'm not even sure how, to be honest with you, but because we were trying to figure out, you're like a squirrel in the wheel. You're trying to figure out how to keep things moving at the time when everything else around you is changing. So we somehow learned that the POAs or the notaries were starting to offer these notary services online, which is unprecedented, and that in of itself was huge. So we started doing that. Now you're able to do that. Now people are able to continue to interact with Dubai and continue to do business with Dubai, even though physically and geographically they're far away. So that was kind of the starting point of it. And then all of a sudden, the court systems went online, the hearings went online, and but it happened at such speed. And there were a lot of few funny moments. I'm sure, we've talked about them, but it's just people trying to figure out, advocates, lawyers trying to figure out how to appear on the judges as well on this little phone to conduct hearings. This had never been done in this part of the world. It was all about these physical visits to the court, physical visits to the notaries, physical documents. Nothing was being done digitally at the time from the legal, in the legal world, that is. And all of a sudden, COVID happens, and within a month, we were doing notarizations online. The court systems went online. The hearings were online. Okay, hearings one thing. We were able, courts went online by offering basically a court portal, set up a court portal for people to set up their own court portal accounts through which they could basically have access into the UAE. Let's start with Dubai, the Dubai courts, which was unprecedented. All of a sudden, as a user, you have access not only into your sort of your little library or your little file on the court's website, you have the access to the entire file of your case, your documents, your submissions, the other side's submissions, the court's decisions, submissions, rulings, decisions, hearings, schedule, and so on and so forth. So you got this just by clicking one button. You've got this window into your entire case file. Now, if you compare that to the previous example that I gave, how it was before COVID, where everything was in physical world and everything was dependent on that one local advocacy, who were inundated with cases anyway. So whenever courts would often issue a decision, it often would take days before people would find out about the verdict in their decisions. So that was the other big boom, and it was working. It wasn't. I mean, they had a little bit of glitches here and there, but it was transforming and evolving at a very rapid pace. And then the other boom was the laws changing, and it was just one after another, after another, after another.
But this is why I want to get to the root of this today, because your excitement tells me everything, and it's just the pace of change. The COVID really was the kickoff for all of this. Power of attorney was a transformative point for sure, but it's the last, I guess it's probably 5 years or so, the pace of change in terms of legislative frameworks. I was going to say to you today, because it's almost as though everything is completely transformed, I think, in lots of ways.
Absolutely.
Frameworks have been overhauled. I was going to throw a few things at you. Mental health, IVF, civil marriages and wills, custody, birth certificates, issuance without a father's name, visas, employment law, bounce checks, travel bans, VAT, UAE, corporate. I could go on, tax, you go on and on. There are obviously still challenges that are being faced, but it's that pace of change that I really wanted to get to today. I was going to ask you, what stands out in the last few years for you? Which I think is probably an impossible question to answer. But there must be a few things that you did not expect.
Indeed, but you cannot say in the last years, because that's too broad for the UAE the last years,
okay,
because in 2020, it was, oh my goodness, decriminalization. And this is the peak of COVID. The rest of the world is in massive lockdown. The UAE in many ways is still physically separated from the rest of the world, isolated because of the travel restrictions. And here we are, we're doing POAs online. We're managing our court portals online, court proceedings online. And then all of a sudden, decriminalization of checks, all of a sudden, decriminalization of cohabitation, decriminalization of relationships out of wedlock, and that was. I mean, so if you're looking at the last few years, the last 5 years, that was the initials, like, wow. Yeah. And then also the criminal procedure laws had changed. So many, that was perhaps, to me, will always be the most memorable time of my practice in the UAE, because it was so exciting, because we had people, and you and I had done podcasts on these many topics, because we had the real people that were truly benefiting from these changes in real life, and we're seeing that, and just the comments, the sort of the sentiments of gratitude that we would receive from people, because their lives were being transformed because of these transformations in the legal jurisprudence in the UAE. That's kind of the starting point, right? Then the other big news was. And that, by the way, I have full disclosure, I would have bets in the office with my team. I said, there's one law will not change during my existence in this country. And
you don't do that anymore, though, do you?
No, I've lost all the bets. But it's the company's law. The company's law, yes, which, as I mentioned earlier, required local ownership of companies in the mainland, thereby 51% ownership by an Emirati national or a company. So I was convinced that would not change for a number of sort of reasons, and because it was so deeply rooted in the way the business was done in the UAE. So when that changed, I honestly, I think I must have fallen off the chair, because that I did not expect it. So that was one of the other huge changes. And then, this gets a little more nuanced, but in the beginning, these changes were happening by virtue of amendments, right? It will be an amendment to a particular provision in the pre-existing law. And then fast forward, I think the last 2 years, a lot of these amendments were basically being incorporated in brand new law. So the previous old law plus its amendments were being scrapped, and now new laws that incorporated not only just those new amendments, but also kind of gave a full new structure were being introduced. So there were kind of these two in the last 5 years. There were these two chunks. The first chunk, transformation in legislative jurisprudence by virtue of amendments, and then basically a complete overhaul to a lot of these legal authorities altogether, and obviously many new laws after that. The company's law was huge. The employment law, the change in the employment law, the introduction of the UAE domestic employees law. Because up until that time, I think 2018 was the first time. Up until that time, employees in the UAE who worked in the domestic sector, they sound like nannies, drivers, nurses, chefs, so on and so forth. They were explicitly not subject to the UAE employment law, and there was no other law that covered them. So in 2018, there was actually a brand new law that was introduced to cover them. So that was a huge change, I remember, and by virtue of that, we're able to help a lot of people who had kind of found themselves on the wrong side of the law. And then there were other laws that were perhaps quite transformative, but maybe a little less exciting for some, such as VAT and the corporate tax law. And then we had the other two kind of big changes, which one was the UAE traffic, the new UAE traffic law, which, among other things, introduced, lowered the driving age to 17 from 18, introduced the self-driving cars, and a number of other transformative provisions. So basically, traffic law is no small thing. It basically covers the entire UAE in terms of roads and types of cars, types of vehicles, driving ages, regulations, and also penalties or punishments. So there's that, and then the UAE personal status law.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, because that's kind of the talk of the town, isn't it?
It certainly is today, but but last time we met, the talk of the town was the UAE traffic law. So the UAE personal status law, which ultimately touches and governs how people in the UAE live. In terms of marriages, divorces, custody, alimony. And that applies to all of us in the UAE, to citizens and residents alike, and even those who are no longer residents in the UAE or not residents at all, but could still be subject to the UAE laws. So it's and that's that is quite transformative as well. However, that is also an add-on to the other legislative amendments, legislative changes that introduce the ability of civil marriage. And then up until that time, there was no way for anyone who wants to get married in the UAE to marry in the UAE other than under Sharia law, right? And sort of a Muslim marriage, if you will. So that was introduced, the civil marriage. And from there on, it's a civil marriage and its effects, which basically means the civil divorces, the alimony, the custody. So it's there. You cherry pick which one of those laws you find the most exciting, most transformative. For us, legal practitioners in our law firm, it's all been super exciting. And the beauty of it is that, as exciting as it was in 2020 during the COVID peak, which I thought, this is it, this was going to be the peak, it continues to get even more exciting. So yes, like you said, the IVF law, the medical malpractice law, the mental health law, the self-driving cars laws, the media laws. So many different laws that touch the virtual assets law, the cryptocurrency, the anti-money laundering laws, the freehold laws, and enforcement of foreign judgments, and so on and so forth. So I can go on, but I think that in itself would require a whole series of podcasts.
I did think it would probably be a very difficult question to answer. it's the dynamism, Ludmila, that I really wanted to get to here. And I'm wondering if I can ask you very broadly to look at the UAE legal system compared to other countries. What stands out to you? What points of difference are there, aside from the dynamism that you've just pointed to? Anything that stands out as particularly impressive aside from that?
Well, there's a few things I wanted to highlight, but I do have to also kind of, as a disclaimer and a reminder, is I've been here for so long that this is kind of what I know now in terms of how to compare what we have here to other jurisdictions. My knowledge is a little dated, so I do want to just put that as a caveat out there. But first and foremost, as we've already discussed, just the digital transformation, like the UAE government's readiness for the digital transformation, and not just on paper and announcements, but in real life, and as it pertains to the legal system. I mean, it's just everything, as we mentioned, from the POAs to the court proceedings to hearings to expert witnesses. I mean, everything these days is happening online. So that sort of the ease of being able to navigate the judicial proceeding, judicial systems is certainly one. The ease and the speed, right, in terms of the transformation and adaptation of that technology. One, two is just the diversity of the legal systems within the legal system. So, I mean, the UAE alone, I mean, although geographically it's a very small country, but it is 7 emirates. And so every emirate has its own judicial system. And then within each certain emirates, there's other judicial systems, like in Dubai alone, we've got obviously the Dubai courts that govern majority of Dubai, and then we have the DIF, which is, by the way, civil law jurisprudence and jurisdiction, and the UAE in general as a legal system is based on civil law, so it's a civil law system. But in Dubai, we also have the DIFC courts, which is the Dubai International Financial Center court, which is based on common law. So you got this common law pocket within the civil law system, and then you have now Abu Dhabi has a similar court as well. It's called the Abu Dhabi Global Markets (ADGM), similar to the DIFC. And it also is based on common law. So here you've got this UAE civil law, and then that has 7 different pockets, and then within each 2 of those pockets you have additional jurisprudence and jurisdiction. Then you have arbitration, and then in Abu Dhabi they're starting to do proceedings, at least in the employment case, in English, and then in terms of the jurisprudence and the courts handling of the cases, it truly is through a fusion system. So it's not really civil law, it's not really common law, but the courts are very much open to continue to adopt. It's almost like different judicial practices from all over the world. So historically, civil law means that it's the courts make decisions on the basis of specific laws and not on the previous cases or precedents. But the UAE and this is what we do as legal practitioners in the UAE these days. We cite laws, cite previous cases and precedents all the time, and the courts rely on them all the time. So from a legal standpoint, that's very, very similar to common law systems. So here we're talking about the mainland courts, and they are in many ways following and adopting practices of civil law of common law jurisdiction. So that's certainly something that's very different from other jurisdictions, if you will. So it's also in many ways less formal than in other countries. The court cases and the way they handled and the judgment, so they're less formal. They're much faster these days, and that was another one of these legislative changes. The civil procedure laws and basically the court laws have also changed, meaning that there were very specific mandates that were given to the different circuits within the court of moving cases faster. And this is no longer just somebody from up top said, okay, cases should be decided faster. This was in the law. It's codified in the law. So cases, therefore, are moving much faster than in many other jurisdictions. And I've seen this firsthand. And that's a huge jump from a lot of the cases. For example, some of the employment cases before these legislative changes we're talking about now, would take 3 to 5 years in the past, and we had some employment cases that took that long. Now they have basically 3 months. Some of the employment.
It's a huge difference.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So then there's kind of different variations of small claims courts as well, into which you can opt in. So there's these kinds of kind of nuances and quite interesting legal tools that are available here that we would not perhaps I would not expect to see or have not seen in other countries. However, there are a few other sort of nuances that perhaps are still kind of we're waiting for them to progress and evolve. I mean, the courts here are not as the court fees here can be a lot higher than they are in other countries, but the legal fees can be a lot lower than other countries. So the court fees, we basically start in most cases from 20,000 dirhams if you want to file a case. In other countries, it's the court fees are almost non-existent because they are funded by the taxpayers, right? Money. So that's perhaps the difference.
Right.
But in terms of legal fees, the local advocates who usually litigate cases in court don't charge as much as, let's say, lawyers do in the U.S. or even in England or other Western jurisdictions. I'll tell you one big difference that I see, this is my personal hope, and I would really like to see this, a dream, perhaps more than hope, is to see change in my lifetime here, is courts sort of regulation of legal practitioners a little more stringent. So in terms of what what is being argued, what is being submitted to the court, and in what form, and a little bit of more enforcement of the law, or perhaps introduction of new regulations in terms of reprimanding legal practitioners and lawyers for arguing certain cases the way they're being argued, because there's so much. I mean, in the U.S., which is obviously where I kind of perhaps compare most with. I mean, these lawyers just would not be lawyers. They'd be disbarred years ago. I mean, if they were making the kinds of submissions that a lot of the lawyers here make to the courts, flat out lies, and they'll submit documents, fraudulent documents, and the courts they'll just okay, well, that document has not been verified, so therefore it's we don't rely on it. So and it kind of stops there. And I just wish there's a little more regulation of what is being submitted, what is being argued to the court, and not just regulation, but a little bit more of a reprimand by virtue of fines and other kinds of penalties. And I have to believe in that will come. So that's my own dream, because we're dealing with so many cases now, and it's a disservice to society. It's a disservice to clients whose interests are being represented. It's a disservice and to the court and the judges, if not an insult. And this is often I want to argue this, but this is an insult to the judge. But the judges, for the time being, they take the stance that it's not for you, the other side, to raise these issues and to argue. It's for the court to decide what we do with this kind of behavior. Fair enough. But then perhaps that's just, that's one area of change that I'd like to witness and experience while I'm still here. And I guess, one more difference is that, as I mentioned earlier, the litigation of court cases in the UAE is still sort of reserved as a domain of local advocates. So you have to be either working under an Emirati firm or work for an Emirati lawyer who are local advocates. So they, for the most part, are the only ones who have the right of audience before the courts. In other words, to represent clients before judges. And I think that the market is such now that it's just that pool of local advocates is just not enough for all the different matters that exist in the UAE, and it would be just a better service to society and will give better access to justice if the pool of practitioners before local courts could be expanded to other legal practitioners, other lawyers beyond just local advocates. There's that, and obviously there's one more, is just that I wish some proceedings could also be done in English, but that's,
But it's a mix at the moment.
It depends, right? So in the DFC courts and the DFC courts, the ADGM courts in Abu Dhabi, it's in English, and then there's certain employment circuit in Abu Dhabi also has certain parts of employment cases that at least being issued in English. And arbitration, obviously, that's a choice of language that you can opt for. Could be whatever language, but for the most part, it's all, so the official language is still Arabic and everything else is in Arabic. Yet the way the majority of the population in the UAE does business is in English. So everything that is submitted to the court has to be translated into Arabic. And that's not just the submissions themselves, but all the documents you submit in support of your arguments, including bank statements, for example, the copies of checks. And as we know, I mean, there's always something that's lost in translation. And in some ways, because of this, the language barrier or this sort of language effect, some litigating cases or trying to bring disputes or argue for people's sort of rights sometimes becomes prohibitively expensive. So people just opt not to do it because it's too expensive to have to do translations and kind of interpreting what happened from one language to another. So some people just kind of give up because it's just it's not accessible to them.
Okay, so those are some of the things you would like to see. Can I get back to you? Because I want to talk a little bit about you and the things you do. From the early days of Ludmila, you were kind of, the talk radio station in Dubai is called Dubai Eye, and you were kind of the legal eagle, I suppose, coming into there. That's where we met. You've kind of been the guest of choice on Dubai Eye for years, pre-Instagram, pre-TikTok, of course. 6 or 7 years ago, you start a podcast. Then with me later on, you very much moved online and taken advantage of social media. That's kind of your strategy, I guess. And I want to kind of talk to you about this kind of brave new world of social media, the connection, the engagement. Free legal advice is a welcome thing. Legal advice is not cheap, and you do a lot of very direct live streams and things like that. The thirst for legal answers hasn't changed, has it? But what's it meant for you? Because to many people, you're kind of known as the TikTok lawyer now.
Sort of, yes. So there's so many things I can say about that. Obviously, COVID. I have COVID to thank for this, by the way, because
it's all COVID with you.
It is really, yes. I think I tell you, this was it. I think it was a blessing in disguise. I mean, COVID affected our practice quite significantly because we are a small practice. We're a boutique firm, and we are dependent on clients. Majority of our clients are foreign entities or individuals who, when COVID struck, obviously were cut off from the UAE or saw the UAE and doing business and living in the UAE from a different perspective. All of a sudden, the country became inaccessible to them. So some pulled out. So we were feeling the pinch as a small practice. And so we had to kind of, reinvent ourselves and evolve and figure out, okay, how do we reach? How do we capture the new client base? How do we communicate with the world when the physical ability to go out to the world is much restricted? So part of it was that. Part of it was because of COVID, so many people suffered, right? So many people lost jobs. They didn't have income to pay for their families. They didn't have income to leave, to go back to their home countries. They couldn't even physically go back to their home countries because the planes were not flying. There were people being sort of asked to stay at home and still employed but not being paid. Landlords are not receiving their rent. Landlords evicting tenants, and so people not being able to pay their mortgages, their car loans, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of people with a lot of problems. And one of the sort of long-standing frustrations I had was that because for Dubai, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, okay? For the UAE, I know where the bones are buried. I have buried some of them myself. So I've been in the country for a long time, and because the law here is not so in depth, I would like to think that I know the law and the the practical aspects of its application in the UAE quite well. So I have a lot of know-how, a lot of knowledge, and I've relied on nobody else but myself and my team to learn. And I started out with literally opening up the books and learning about the law, the UAE law, on my own. So I have all this knowledge, but I didn't really have a good way to communicate to the masses. But I'm still a law firm, so I cannot be like some people mistook me for like a legal Google, but like I can't just provide free legal advice to the masses. I won't survive, because I am I run the firm. I funded myself with the proceeds that I recover on a monthly basis, and so that's how it's always been. I don't have any debt. I've never taken debt. Everything I earn is I put back in the business, and that's how I've always run my practice. So therefore, I cannot do so much pro bono. I cannot do so much free work, because I need to be able to pay my staff and rent for the office and all the other utilities and all the other business expenses that are continuing to increase. So this is a combination of, like, I've got the knowledge base, and I know there's a pool of people that really need the information, and they need to understand what their rights are. The maids, the nannies, the employees that are being let go, the laborers. They'll never be able to afford my fees. So women and mothers that are losing custody, or people that are being abused at home. Like, there's all these people that are going through so many different legal problems, and they will not be able to afford my fees or anybody's legal fees because of the circumstances that drive them. I have the information to give them because I've been here long enough. I've sort of touched almost every aspect of law. I have something to give. So how do you reach the masses? For a while, we were doing these presentations. Remember the Zoom presentations, and so people would there's workshops or on through Zoom, just to kind of give access to the people. But again, that's a lot more sort of time-based, and perhaps a little more in depth than a lot of these people would need to or want. And then there's also my own practice. So how do we reach a broader base? And then that was the first time, because like you said, I was on Dubai before for many, many years. I had never really needed to market myself. So this was the time I realized I think I need to take a pivot and figure out a way to market us as a firm. And so we decided to hire a marketing person for the first time ever. And that was, and the marketing people these days, for the most part, they're youngsters. They're a different generation. And so the idea was like, hey, listen, let's go on social media. And I had seen other people, other businesses who were doing social media, but I'm the Facebook generation. I still, to this day, my only personal social media account is Facebook. I never took to Instagram. So whatever's out there on social media, that's my professional social media presence. So I only have my own. So that's my age, by the way, Tim. I'm not sure if you know, but like the others in my office, for them, they don't even know what Facebook is almost, because it's that old. So I had seen that others had kind of been, other businesses started to use other social media platforms for advertising business, which was at the time was still not a thing. So it was kind of this combination of things. And so you have this young marketing person who comes in and says, hey, listen, let's do what we have to offer. We have something of value to offer to the public. So the best way to do it is just a short video and put it out on social media, and and see where it goes. Yeah. And that's basically how it started. And so we did the first one, and I think the first video, oh my God, it was so painful for me to record it, because like the whole thing was so. Not me standing in front of the camera and talk to the camera. Ooh, because just that's not my personality, not my generation. I didn't grow up with this sort of Instagram, always taking pictures and videos, or TikTok, and so. And we go on TikTok, and within, I think, the first few minutes, we posted the first video. I don't even remember what it was about. Something, obviously, I'm not sure it was employment, I think, related. And we had like 10,000 views within just, I think, a few hours. So to me, I didn't even know what that meant. But, from there on, basically, and then in response, and that's the beauty of social media, the dynamic, to use your word, interface, because you feel the audiences or the followers' reaction and response immediately. And so people would ask more questions, and how about this, and how about that? So, and you were like, okay, well, I've got knowledge about this, I've got database about this. I've got information about this. Oh, this is a really interesting one. I don't know about it, but it's kind of curious. I want to learn about it. So my whole team was basically, would kind of put our heads together and we would research the different areas of law, the different questions that would come our way, and we just continue to feed the information, because ultimately, you do this once. But by the way, to do, as you know, to do this 1.5, or at the time was only 1 minute videos on TikTok would take an inordinate amount of time for us, because as lawyers, and the advice we put out, I mean, I assume, and that's obviously why I'm doing it, is that people rely on it. If people are going to rely on it, it has to be bulletproof. It has to be certain, and it has to be clear, and it has to be accessible to the broader audience. So how do you take this volume of information and the different interpretation to each one of the potential provisions, if not words? Because remember, the laws here also published in Arabic first, so the original language is Arabic. How do you take that, interpret all that, and put it in this 1 minute video? So there's an inordinate amount of work that went into it collectively as my team. We would always, and it was an exciting time because we would all work so closely together and collaborate on so many of these ideas and twists and turns and pivots, and in the way to finally mold this 1 minute video. But once you've done that, the video has such a massive reach, and it just goes out to, I think some of my videos gone up to like 800,000 people. So it was just that gave you this, this is worth doing it. This is worth doing. This is not so natural to me, but it's worth the effort.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Because one of the things about talking about anything legal is legal language. Legalese has... I don't understand it. I've been talking to you for years about it. But, to be able to break that down, to be able to communicate legal issues effectively and clearly and truthfully as well, there's a real thirst for that. That's kind of the point I'm trying to get to here. It's so important to do that. And you got to a point where, am I right in saying you're the first verified lawyer on TikTok? Is that right?
Indeed. Yes, I was. Yes.
That's good going.
Honestly, I have to tell you, and for this, I have to compliment sort of the social media platforms, the social media companies, because they've created this portal for the world, portal information, and a portal of way for people to communicate and to learn. That is so incredibly beneficial for the broader audience. Obviously, it has its own pitfalls, but I'm talking from the educational standpoint. So it's very inspiring, and it's kind of like exciting when you see people that then comment, "Oh my God, thank you so much! Like your advice helped me, and I feel like I'm a free person now. Like I've transformed my life because of your advice." It's very motivating. It's kind of exciting. Yeah. So and that's something we didn't have before. Yeah. I mean, so how else would you have learned about a specific law? You go to a lawyer, you cannot afford a lawyer. Where you look on Google, Google will give you citations from different laws or articles, legal articles. Again, as a layman, an ordinary person, I mean, how are you supposed to decipher how that particular law applies to your specific situation? And there's very few to this day lawyers that do free or much pro bono work. So and also for a lot of these people, they don't need to actually have a lawyer representing their case. They just need to know a bit of information on a very isolated issue, and they can make the right decisions. And that's basically became known as a TikTok lawyer, and I'd be approached out there in public. Not that I go to public very much anymore, and that's the other flip side.
Is that because you get mobbed by all your fans?
Yes. There's so many fans. The paparazzi's everywhere. I know. Yeah. Yes, there's just not enough red carpets for me, so that's why I refuse to go out.
Ludmila gets tapped. Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, because it's trying to understand how you translate your firm and take it online and approach people, and that's a real key. I want to get some of your wisdom, Ludmila, because one of the things about this podcast is we're trying to talk to people who are, I don't know, doing things first or doing things differently, or blazing their own trail, like Aramex has done. So I've a set of closing questions. I've chosen 3 of them for you. The first is the most important thing you've learned. What's the most important lesson that you have taken away? Whether that's from your career or from being the TikTok lawyer, whatever?
Lesson, if I were just to isolate onto one, is just hard work. There's
Right.
there's no substitute for hard work. So that's it. And it's hard work and time. Honestly, it's just time after time after time. It's just that, you spend a year working hard and then you coasting for the rest of life. At least that hasn't happened to me. And I think the reality is such, and I consult a lot of businesses and a lot of people. It's not a reality of the majority of people out there, no matter how others try to portray it, their success. Oh, I started up a company and it's so successful and it took me a year and now I've got these investors that are trying to buy it. That's, it's either a very, very small minority or just not true to begin with. And I know that because many of them do come to me eventually, even though you read in the news and you judge them from the media, oh my gosh, they're this great success story until they're not. So hard work and time and hard work and more of the same over and over again. And so this just, that this truth has sort of withstood the test of time.
Okay. You give a lot of people advice. If you could go back and give your younger self advice, what would it be?
I mean, at the risk of sounding a little cliche or corny, is like just follow your intuition, follow your instinct, and do things that that speak to you, that sort of truly come from the heart. And I know, again, as I said, I put out a disclaimer kind of early on. It's at the risk of sounding like a little cliche, especially as a woman. I'm sure there's a lot of stereotypes around that. Oh, follow your heart. But truly, if you want to succeed in something, you need to be passionate about it. And passion comes from where? It comes from the heart. It comes from the soul. So if something tells you, and that kind of that sort of permeates your whole life journey, or should permeate your whole life journey. Often we follow advice, or we follow sort of beliefs that we think the society wants us to do, or somebody, our peers, or family, and it doesn't really quite come from here. And trust me, I've done that myself, and that's why if I were to look back and had another chance at life, like I would have followed my own gut feeling, my own intuition more often. I got to the point finally. I kind of at some point, I just, if something didn't sit right, I just kind of stayed away from it. But it took me years to feel comfortable with that. Okay. So I'd say certainly follow your gut, follow your instincts, and just don't be afraid to just to follow your feeling. The other one is just to not focus too much on your weaknesses, but rather focus on your strengths. Because I think all too often we feel insecure about certain things that are sort of our weakness, and we put so much heart and soul in trying to fix those weaknesses and abandon our strengths that we just, in many ways, it kind of leads us to, there's a risk at least of just leading us to mediocrity, and we omit potentially of achieving greatness if we just focus more on our strengths and not be afraid of our weaknesses. And we all have weaknesses, you see. So I'd say that's the other one. And then I am guilty of this crime, and this is why if I were to recommend or wish to others, that would be, or for myself, my younger self, that be more of that, is just focus. And we all know what we're good at kind of early on in life. And so if we just, more of us focus on that early on, then I think we'd see a lot more confident people, and people sort of pursue things for the right reasons.
It's probably good to do what you're good at. I think that's pretty decent advice. More people should follow that. Last question, and this is the wrap question of all of these episodes. What would you like to see happen or change or affect most in the world? What would you like most to unbox, and why would you like to do that?
Well, I mean, listen, we live in a pretty cool era, if you think about it, in terms of just the opportunities, the experiences, that the sort of the tools that are available to us, as compared to even 30 years ago,
I was going to say
40
last
years.
week.
Yeah,
this week than it was.
But indeed. So,
Yeah.
so I think comparatively speaking, I think we live in a pretty cool generation, cool era, where most things are like nothing is off limits, right? So we have access to information, we have access to travel, we have freedom of movement, freedom of choice. There's so much diversity in this world as compared to, I was growing up in Ukraine, or when it was part of the Soviet Union. I didn't have that. Most people sort of were born and raised and lived and died in the same small town in the same house.
Yeah.
So there's so much that we already have, that we've already unboxed, if you will, as the world. But if I think about what's there to unbox for, in particular, less perhaps about us, but more for the future generation, the younger generation, for my children who are young. It's just, I think it's the importance and the power of meaningful connections.
Okay.
Of meaning, of doing something that's meaningful, and connections particular. Because what I see these days, and this is perhaps the other side of social media, is that so many youngsters are now kind of are detached from the physical contact, from the social element of just kind of playing out there outside and rolling in the mud and in the dirt and just being out there climbing trees and jumping from rocks and coming home with broken skin and bleeding and and I think we're humans, you see, we're not machines, and so this is part of the human development and the human growth. So what I'm seeing, this is we're moving away from that, and I'm judging it from the perspective of my children's generation, because I see so much of it as just the kids are spending too much time inside on their gadgets, on devices, and even if they're in the same room together, they're all looking at gadgets, playing together. So I think, to me personally, perhaps it's very old-fashioned, but that's because the world already has all these amazing opportunities. I mean, look at AI. I mean, look at what things can be done just at the click, a tap of a fingertip. So what do I wish for the future generation, knowing that all this technological platform and foundation that's in place right now is only going to continue to evolve by leaps and bounds. So that's kind of a given. Yeah. But what are we perhaps risking to lose is just meaningful and personal connections, and just kind of being a little more sort of raw and naked and dirty, kind of in the way that we interact with each other and with the world.
Ludmila Yamalova is the founder. She's the managing partner of the Dubai-based legal practice HPL Yamalova and Plethka, or LY Law, and she is also the TikTok lawyer. I always like talking to you, Ludmila. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.